Hi, welcome to, we'll call this Friday Reads for the sake of continuity, but obviously it's Monday when this video will upload, maybe even Tuesday depending on how my editing goes. But I'm going to admit to being pretty far behind because this particular video starts off with a book that I read back on the 22nd of February, and it continues through the books that I read to the 28th of February. Then I have the Friday reads to do for the 1st through the 7th, and then this Friday I will have the Friday reads that pick up from there. So we'll call this Friday Reads Part 1, and again, it covers those dates that I've already mentioned. Now, in this particular week, and I have to carefully flip through my traveler's notebook so I don't get too confused. I'm going to do something just a bit more. I'm going to do my Friday reads and maybe my February wrap up, but it depends on how long this part of the video takes. As far as this fourth video that would have come up at the end of February, that would have been 13 books that I read in that period of time. Now, for the month of February, which as I mentioned, I may do a separate video for my wrap up. It was a total of 56 books. The 55 is because I read parts of 2 books and I didn't include one of those books in the Friday reads because I didn't finish it. Okay. As far as this is concerned, like I mentioned, there were 13 books, and I do have my notes right here. And I'm going to move my traveler's notebook out of the way and plow right into these notes. Okay, the first book that I read for this wrap up here is Rebel by Beverly Jenkins. Now, this book came out in May of, well, it will be out, I should say, May 28th of this year. Of course, I read it early, as I read some of my books early. I love this book. I gave it 5 stars. And Rebel is book number 1 in the Women Who Dare series. And I think I'm actually on schedule for my reviews. So I will basically just be reading the reviews that I wrote. As far as Rebel is concerned, I say that history is changing in New Orleans, and Valinda Lacey is happily busy as she's educating newly freed slaves. She's teaching more than reading and writing. She's teaching them the basic skills of living, especially because things have changed. Slavery is over, but the people still have a long, long way to go. So Valinda, she's teaching a lot of skills. Sadly, though, thugs destroy her school. People who don't want progress to happen, they destroy her school. So not only does she lose her school, but she gets the aid of somebody. His name is Captain Drake Levesque. So she's lost her school, but with Captain Drake, she has a chance of losing her heart. Now, he's an architect, and he has plans on rebuilding New Orleans. Now, this happened before Valinda lost her school. So when he sees that she's in trouble, he sets out to, at the very least, help her to rebuild. So he does his best to do that, but at the same time, he's attracted to her, he's drawn to her, but he knows that her father has promised her to somebody else. Now, she is a woman who's trying to respect her father. This is Valinda. She knows that she has to honor him. She wants to honor him, but she's not in love with the man that she's supposed to marry. And the person that she would like to marry would be Drake, but she doesn't see how that will be possible. Well, things change, and there comes an element of danger, and when this happens, they get thrown together more, and the story begins to shift a little bit. And in as much as this is a romance, it's also a historical fiction, because it talks about the emancipation and how New Orleans is in a process of a reconstruction. So times were definitely not easy. And I mentioned already that the danger had increased. And that's basically the summary. And my review is simple because, I state how, as I mentioned, it's the first book in the Woman Who Dare series. It was very engaging. I can't wait to see what other offerings are in the book. Obviously, women will be the principal characters, and we have a lot to look forward to. Now, this is my first time reading Beverly Jenkins, and I do have 3 of her backlist books in mind that I'd like to read, and I think she writes great. From what I can tell here, she writes good books that really touch on history. Moving on to a book that's part of a series that I'm not required to read, but I'm reading it because I ran across it as a friend of mine told me about it, and her and another friend are reading it, and this is Bake Sale Murder by Meier. I think there's 25 to 26 books in the series. I'm about halfway there because I read book number 13, and it's the Lucy Stone series. Now, this was my least favorite so far. I only gave this one 3 stars. And what happens in this book is there's 5 modular homes that were built near Lucy Stone's house, and the problems plagued from the beginning. You have loud neighbors, a loud teenager, and as if that wasn't bad enough, you have a neighbor that's chronically complaining about every little thing. Well, this chronic complainer suddenly gets killed. So in the midst of this, school's about to start. That's why it's called Bake Sale Murder. And there's something that they have that's called the Hat and Mitten Fund. And so Lucy and some of her friends get together and decide to have a bake sale in order to put money together to help parents buy school supplies for their children. So that's the purpose of the bake sale. But as mentioned, this woman, Mimi, the woman's name is Mimi Stanton, she gets killed. And when she's found dead, the police are on task, but then so is Lucy Stone, because not only is she a reporter, but she's an amateur sleuth, so she begins to follow leads of her own. And as mentioned, it's the 13th book in the series. It's pretty typical of every book I've read so far. It just wasn't as exciting as the other ones. But I did enjoy it, and I'm definitely looking forward to going on to the next book. And by the way, the next book in the series is St. Patrick's Day Murder. And I am trying to read 1 book per month, so it'll take me the rest of the year. I'm not in any rush. The next book, again, is part of a series, and that's Ceremony and Death by J.D. Robb. Again, it's not a review title, but it's a series that I'm trying to read. And this is only the 5th book in the series that I've read, and there's 45 to 46 books. They're coming out every year. Friends of mine are reading it. Some are very far in it. Some haven't started it yet, and I'm only on the 5th book, and that's this one here. And this is basically talking about, obviously, Lieutenant Eve Dallas. And in this particular case, a fellow police officer has died, and what she has to do is find out the circumstances surrounding the death, and then another person dies, and then she discovers that the tie-in between the murders is rooted in pure evil. And I gave this book 4 stars when the first 4 books I gave 5 stars each. And that's because the subject matter was kind of difficult for me to finish the book. It was talking about Wiccans and Satanists and things of that nature. Nothing was graphic. I didn't violate my conscience in any manner, but it still wasn't something that I relished reading. So I didn't love this book. But it was good to see Eve at work, and of course Rourke, who is now Eve's husband, and how they work together to figure things out. And I think it's really a good book. 4 stars is not a bad rating. It's an excellent series so far, and I look forward to picking up the next book in the series this month. I didn't write the name of that one down though. The next book I read, which is the 4th book, is called An Unconditional Freedom, and this is by Alyssa Cole. It came out right around the time that I read it, which was February 26th, and I gave this one 5 stars. Now, this is a Loyal League number 3. I read the first 2, and they were An Extraordinary Union and A Hope Divided. So, in this particular book, Janita Sanchez, I'm sorry I couldn't pronounce her name, she has a role. She's playing a double agent. Her father's been accused of treason and he's in prison, and if she succeeds in her challenge or her case, then she can get him released. Well, Janetta will be working with a spy named Daniel Cumberland, but he doesn't realize that she's working at cross purposes. He has his own challenges, this Daniel, because now he has to come to terms that his beloved, who we met in the second story, she belongs to somebody else. They're still very good friends, but he's still coming to terms with that. The Civil War is raging, and his job and his assignment is to take down the Confederacy, so he does not have it easy. So his objective makes him aim high. So despite his frustration with not being able to marry the woman of his dreams, he has a lot of anger, but he's got to bury that anger in order to meet his challenge. Well, Daniel and Janetta, they grow an attraction to one another. This isn't easy because the missions are secret from one another, and so we know that this is going to increase or bring additional conflict. So it's not a simple romance story. It's not a simple tale. It's not even billed so much as a romance. It's billed more as a historical fiction. Well, the times are hard. All the goings on that happen here, such as the horrors of slavery and the fact that Daniel was born free, but because of his assignment, he gets sold into slavery just so that he can complete his job. So he was freed again, but now that he was freed, then he was enslaved, he's freed again, but no doubt he has a lot of angst. So it's taking place right around the time the slavery is abolished, and the story does illustrate how terrible slavery was. So reading about this in the form of fiction wasn't easy, but I think that the author did a great job. Again, I read 2 books about slavery, so I did have to peek at her name, Alyssa Cole. Alyssa Cole did a great job. And I also want to note that I read all 3 of these books in this series in quick succession within a week of each other. So I was really familiar with the various characters in these books. So reading here, it wasn't so hard because I was acclimated to the time period, to the history being retaught to me in some manner. And I think it was a good job. There was a lot of serious issues, more than slavery. It was things such as white supremacy, neo-Nazis, Confederates, and things of that nature. So, I said here to make sure to read the note that's included at the end of the book to see the unfortunate but true comparison that this well-informed author makes. And there's also an excellent bibliography in this book. So don't miss this book. I think that it's a good read and a lot of people should read it. Okay, moving on to book number 5, which was The Darkness Absolute by Kelley Armstrong. I'm going to flip my pages to see. Yes, I put these in order. I didn't read these in order, but I put them in order in these notes because this is a series. It's the Rockton series. I read the first book in the series last week, which was City of the Lost. And then this book is number 2, which is A Darkness Absolute, and then I read 3 and 4. As far as The Darkness Absolute is concerned, it continues where we left off at City of the Lost, where we met Casey Duncan, who was a homicide detective, and how she was successful in solving the first ever murder in the town of Rockton. Now, we learned in the first book of the series, but for the sake of those who aren't familiar with it, Rockton is a very unique place. It's a place where people who are criminals or need to escape real life for a time can find refuge for just about any reason, for a fee and for a limited time. Well, Casey had committed murder at one time in her life, and she got away with it. She even achieved the point of being a homicide detective, but she needed to get away. She escaped to Rockton. So now it's been a few months. She's been there for a minute, and now another town's member is in trouble. This particular town's member got stir crazy. You know, you have to live in some very strange circumstances in Rockton. There's no email, there's no internet, there's no snail mail even. There's no electricity, so the circumstances are real. Well, someone got a little bit stir crazy, and when this happened, he got stranded in a blizzard. So Casey and the sheriff's deputy go off, and they try to find this guy. And when they do, they discover a woman who had been kidnapped, I believe 10 years before that, and she had been 1 year. And she had been tortured and really dreadfully traumatized. And then, in the process of trying to get her safely back to town, they discovered the bodies of 2 more missing women who were murdered. So the question is there an outsider that escaped the radar of Brockton, or is it somebody in the town that they don't know? Are they safe? Are other women safe? Questions like that. Meanwhile, Casey and Eric Dalton, who is the town sheriff, they become a regular thing. Complications were there for sure. And one of these complications is Anders, and he's the deputy that was with her when she found that woman, or when the woman was found. And let's see, then the story talks a little about the woman that was found. Her name was Nicole Chavez, and how some of the horrors that she endured. And that took me down to 4.5 stars for this book, because I don't want to, this horrors were unspeakable. But Casey, she's a good detective. She's unstoppable, as is Eric. They're relentless in their search, and they find out who's responsible for this. And it was great storytelling, excellent pacing. And I did move on to other books, but I decided to read this whole series so that I could review the 4th book in the series, which was Watcher in the Woods. And I'm going to go on. I'll say briefly, it does have a lot of suspense. It's very dark. It was not too dark that it was hard to follow the series through. No, I finished the series. At least what's been written up until this point. Now, the next book in the series, which is book number 6 for the sake of this wrap-up, is This Fallen Prey, obviously Kelley Armstrong, which this one came out in February of 2018, and I gave this one 4 stars. And it's the 3rd book in the Rockton series, and I don't have to tell you about Casey Duncan and why she's in Rockton in the first place, because I already did. Now, let's see, at this point here, there is a man who the town's council has approved of staying in Rockton for a period of time, which I believe is about 6 months, and he's a serial killer who no doubt should be on death row. Well, when he gets there, he's allowed to hide out in the town, and his name is Oliver Brady. He swears up and down that he's innocent, and when he gets there, however, what can go wrong does go wrong. Now, Casey not only has to ascertain whether or not this man, Brady, is innocent, but why is he actually there, and how he got there, and what kind of danger and things of that are going to face the town now that he is there. And that's basically the crux of the story, and what Brady does while he's there. And at the same time, Casey and Eric Dalton's relationship is fleshed out. Let's see, her friend Diana, who is part of the reason Casey got to go to Rockton, she still plays a major role in this story as well. And I then moved on to, it was good, I gave it 4 stars as I mentioned, and I moved on to book number 4 in the series. Okay, the next book that I read, which was the 7th book, and it continues right after the first two that I talked about in the Rockton series. This is the 3rd book. It's Casey Duncan's story continuing, and in this case, right at the end of the previous book, there was not really a cliffhanger, but there was somebody in the town who was hurt, and this person needed at least to see a specialist, and they chose to ask her sister April, who's a neurosurgeon, to go with Casey and Eric. The sheriff went to April's home, which was near where Casey used to live before she went to Rockton. Now, you've got to remember the first 2 stories I've talked about. Well, they asked April to go back with them and to try to help this man. He needed a neurosurgeon. He had been injured. I'm not going to say how in case you want to read the story. Now, this is a real challenge to both sisters because they weren't getting along much anyway, and now they're going to be in close contact with one another. And right in the midst of April agreeing to come and help, a U.S. Marshal shows up and says that I have somebody that needs to be released to me, and he's one of the residents of the town. Well, before even that can happen, he's killed. So right away, Casey is involved and embroiled into another crime. Now, I read these series in very short order in just a few days with a book in between here and a book in between there. So all of the members, all the characters, all their stories and their current circumstances, they were very familiar to me. We have Casey and why she was in the town. We've learned now why Eric lives in the town. Other people like Diana, Casey's former best friend, Anders, and other people, all these characters, I'm very familiar with them at this point. And I'll say that each story can stand alone, but if you want to escape for a few days or a week, go ahead and go to your library or your bookstore or Amazon and grab them all. And do I need to say them again? Of course I'll say them again. City of the Lost, A Darkness Absolute, This Fallen Prey, and this one here is Watcher in the Woods. And as always, the book cover will show above so that you'll know which books I'm speaking about. Well, in this particular case, if you just were to read Watcher in the Woods, you might just miss something, because here the danger is very high, but at the same time, the byplay between Casey and Eric, that's just stellar. I enjoyed it. The story is full of intrigue, great crime solving, and I love the way that the relationships were built and the cases reestablished. I think it was done really well. I practically inhaled each book in the series. And there's another book coming out. It's not named, it's not even dated yet, but all Goodreads or Fantastic Fiction says is another book coming out later this year. So I look forward to continuing on there. Okay, we're going to move on, and I don't have that many more left. Book number 8 is Can't Escape Love by Alyssa Cole. Now, remember, I had just talked about her other book, and that was In Unconditional Freedom. Now, let me kind of explain this. In Unconditional Freedom was book number 3 in the Loyal League series. Book number 4 came out after it, which is March 29th, so it's not even out yet. And this is billed as book number 3.5. And I could not reconcile that anywhere. But it's a novella. It's real brief. I loved it, though. I gave it 4.5 stars. Now, it's about a woman who's a nerd with glasses in a wheelchair. What he is an escape room creator, including having a live stream where she is his only follower. Well, who are they? They're Regina Hobbs and Gustave Nguyen, which is Nguyen, and some people say Nguyen. Obviously, it's a Vietnamese name. They met online years ago, and they're soon to meet in person. And Reggie, the nerd in a wheelchair, I love her. She's a successful businesswoman, and she runs a company called Girls with Glasses. Currently, she's overstressed and has insomnia. And when she was going to his live stream for that long period of time, only his voice would put her to sleep. But he's like at the end of it, he doesn't want to do it anymore. So she comes up with a plan that will allow him to use his voice to relax her into sleep. So Gus has a challenge. Can he do this? And at the same time, he has a job. Can he create an escape room that centers around a romance anime? This is something he knows nothing about. So she has something she wants him to do, and he needs her to help him with that. So they strike up a deal, a very nice trade, and maybe he'll succeed in his endeavor. It's a cute little story. I didn't write the number of pages down, but I think it was 61, 62 pages, which is real quick. And I think it's a great addition to the Reluctant Royal series. And we even get to see Portia, who is Reggie's twin. They have email conversations, so it's kind of cute, or chat conversations. So, and also it's another interracial story, which Alyssa Cole does really well at that. I want to thank Avon Impulse and Etta Weiss for that book as well. And I didn't thank anybody for any of these other books. Like, I'm going to pop back. Rebel was through the Avon and NetGalley. And Unconditional Freedom, that was due to Kensington Books and NetGalley. Watcher in the Woods, I want to thank, who was that with? That one, I don't know. I feel bad. I got that directly from the author. I think I got it from NetGalley as well, but the author sent me that one. She sent me the print copy of it. As a matter of fact, when I'll show the digital copy because I don't have the print copy next to me, but I do want to thank the author for that. Now, moving on to the 9th book, and this is very disjointed, so if you want to give up on me, go right ahead. The next book is The Christmas Cowboy Hero by Donna Grant. This came out 2017, so a year and a half ago maybe. This is the Heart of Texas #1, and I had the second book in the series, so since I love to read series, I went back and I read that one. My review is long on this one, and I'm going to try to get through it quickly. It's talking about how when ex-Navy SEAL Clayton East came home, it was because his father was ill and his family ranch was failing. They were in financial trouble, and what Clayton wanted to do was to come back home, try to see his father to good health if possible, but at the very least restore the family's ranch. Now, when he gets there, they hit a financial kink in the plans because some of his cattle was rustled, and the only person they could catch in this rustling activity was a young man named Bryce Harper. Well, when Clayton sees Bryce at the jail, he also sees Bryce's sister Abby, and something about the two of them strikes a chord in his heart. So instead of prosecuting the boy for stealing his cattle, he strikes up a deal. He ends up helping Bryce, but ultimately he ends up helping Abby and their younger brother. And the story with Bryce and Abby and their younger brother, their mother left them when Abby was 18 and the boys were, I believe, 6 and 10 or 8 and 10. Well, now the boys are teenagers and Abby's a woman, and she's still the primary and only caretaker of her teen brothers, and she'll do anything for them. She's working a job that doesn't give her any glory. She's got great big brains, but all she's doing is trying to keep her family's head above water. So it's an affecting story. It's very touching because not only does Clayton take her in, but Clayton's mother takes them in, and it's just so sweet. And if that wasn't sweet enough, it's the way Abby is with her brothers. That was very, very sweet as well. Now, that's the first in the Heart of Texas series. The next two books is Cowboy Cross My Heart and My Favorite Cowboy. Now, it's My Favorite Cowboy that I have for review, but I also read Cowboy Cross My Heart, and I think I read it, yes, I had to check. I did read it in this particular week, so I'm going to talk about it right here. Now, years have passed. Obviously, Clayton and Abby have gotten married, and now this story here is Bryce's story. Now, Bryce, he served in the military. He's now a grown man. He's a cowboy, but he's also a rodeo star. And there's a woman at the rodeo who is a photographer working on a project for her best friend. The woman's name is Naomi Pierce, and Naomi and Bryce hit it right off. But before their romance can even take any more of a jump or a leap, sadly, Whitney, the woman who Naomi is there to photograph, is being stalked, and things get really hairy, and they actually ask Bryce to help, and he does help. And I did note here that he was 8 when his mother walked out on him and his younger brother. So now he's a good guy, and he does a good job. And he works at the rodeo with his brother Caleb. They both work for the East Farm. And the East Farm, remember Clayton East from the first story. So the story moves on to dealing with the trouble that Whitney's in and all that goes on with that. And then by extension, Naomi and Bryce become a couple, and then his family. It's all family oriented. Everything plays in. And I think I'm just going to end it there, other than to say that it ended well. I only gave this 4 stars. I didn't go any higher because the romance was really secondary, despite the fact that it's a romance. Okay, moving on to, book number 11, which was My Favorite Cowboy, and this is the 3rd book in the Heart of Texas series. This book came out on February 26th, and I gave this one 5 stars. Actually, it's My Favorite Cowboy, but it was also my favorite book of the 3 so far. And I'll tell you at the end that there is another book, at least one more book coming out. Now, in this particular book, it's about the youngest member of the family, and his name is Caleb Harper. We've already learned about Abby, and we've learned about Bryce, and now it's Caleb's turn. And in this story, it's about Audrey Martinez, who's a vet, and she has a lot of work because she already works for 2 farms. But when she hears that a horse is sick, she's devastated because she can't stand to see any animal suffering. So she offers her services to the East Farm and also to the ranch that Caleb Harper and his, the entire family owns. So not only does that horse become ill, but another horse falls ill. So Caleb and Audrey work together to find out what is actually going on. Now, Caleb's not new to this adversity that's facing him at the ranch because when he was a young boy, as already mentioned, his mother abandoned him and his brother and his sister. So he has a lot of leftover angst because of this. Despite that, Abby brought him and his brother up really well, but that abandonment still affects him, and it also affects how he may or may not do when it comes to Audrey. Now, during the years that's passed, Abby is the owner, married to Clayton East, the owner of the East Ranch, and now Bryce is married, and now does Caleb have a turn at finding the same happiness that they found? Well, it affects because he was the youngest of the 3, so he seems to have been hit the hardest. So this affects what happens with him and Audrey. Now, he can't help being drawn to her, but can he let some of this baggage go? Well, it was very touching to see their relationship bloom all while his trust was growing. And I liked Audrey. She's a rather unique individual. She was very, very, very much enjoying men in her life, but this is because she never knew how to open her heart. Now she has a chance to open her heart, and can being with Caleb allow her to do that? Can she grow? Can he grow? And can they have a future together? As I already mentioned, it's my favorite of the 3 stories. Each sibling has its own story, so each story can stand alone, but if you like me and you like series, I'd say the whole series is compelling, and it would be done well if you read it in order. Their history is touched on, but the deepest trauma is explored across all 3 books, so that's why I encourage you to read the whole series. Now, I'm excited to find out that the series is going to be continued with a book called A Cowboy Like You, which is slated for release in August. No doubt I'll have this book in a month or 2, and I'll definitely read it soon. Now, my favorite cowboy was provided to me by St. Martin's Press and NetGalley, and I really appreciated the opportunity to review it. Book number 12 is The Story of Us by Tara Sivec. Okay, I got this book from Forever. Sad to say, it's pretty old. It came out in November, but I only managed to just read it a couple of weeks ago. And I love the story. I gave it 4 stars. And it tells us about Lieutenant Elijah James, who was a prisoner of war for exactly 1,843 days. And that's what the blurb shows that I use when I put my reviews together. Obviously, it's very tragic because what he experienced during those times was definitely unspeakable because it was a lot of years that passed. And what's worse is his best friend Rylan during their capture. So when he returns home, he wants to go back to the only woman who could heal his broken soul, and that is Shelby Eubanks. Now, they had a special love when they were together that he's desperate to rekindle. However, when he sees her again, as ecstatic as she is that he's alive, she's holding back. She's not the same woman he left all those years ago, and in some ways, she seems more broken than he is, and he's trying to figure out why. Now, she's involved now with a man named Landry, a man that she's even agreed to marry. And what's worse is she's under her mother's thumb. Her mother treats her terribly. And this was hard for me. And this is why the book got 4 stars, by the way. Well, Eli hopes that he can reach Shelby's heart and let her know that he never stopped loving her, and for her to be able to deal with the emotional abuse she receives from her mother. Now, she has her reasons for trying to keep her distance from Eli, but her heart's very, very involved. The question is, has she ever stopped loving him? If she hasn't stopped loving him, why is she with Landry, and why, as a grown woman, is she still under the thumb of her mother? Those are issues that she has to face now, and it goes to show that there's something else too, but before I mention that, they had challenges that they shared when they were younger, but their challenges have only grown even so now, because there's yet one thing that she's hiding from Eli, and I'm not going to tell you that. Read the story. It's very heartbreaking. It's an appropriate title, which is a story of us, because it's a story of two people who are given a second chance, but they have to move mountains to find their way back to one another. So the story was delivered in dual point of view, her point of view, his point of view. Some of his POV was in the form of letters that he wrote to her when he was when he was captured. So it was a very emotional read, and as I mentioned, I did enjoy it, and I gave it 4 stars. And again, I want to thank Forever for providing me with the art. The last book that I read, which is actually book number 13, is The Care and Feeding of Ravenously Hungry Girls, and this is by Anissa Gray. And let's see, it came out February 19th. I read it a week or so after it came out, and I gave this one 4 stars. Now, in this particular book, Althea Butler Cochran, she's the oldest of 3 sisters, and she has become the family matriarch. And things weren't easy when they were growing up. The book touched on some of the things that the girls went through, but they did make it. Lillian, let me see if I can say this properly. Well, let me just go according to my written review, because I can't jump ahead. Althea is married to Proctor, and they have 2 teenage daughters. They were involved in a horrible scandal, and they were arrested for embezzlement, tried, and imprisoned. So her sisters Lillian and Viola, they have to step up and decide who's going to care for their twin daughters, and they are Baby V and Kim. And Kim and Baby V, they struggle while their parents are pulled away from them, and the trials they go through are pretty intense, especially Kim. Now, the story is delivered in 3 first-person points of view. We get Althea's point of view, Viola's, and Lillian, the 3 sisters. They each tell their own story, and it really does become quite emotional. We don't deal with just the present and trying to place the teen daughters. We deal with their past and how each has come along in life, and how the past has turned them into the women they are today, and how they made it through. Like, one is a psychologist, Althea was a successful owner of a business, and it talks about those things. It also discusses the childhood trauma that occurred and how this might affect what would happen to the placement of the girls. I thought that was rather interesting. Now, I consider this debut novel to be a shocking portrayal of what could happen in a family, and because of that, I felt that it was a moving and excellent read. I believe this was a debut novel, so I'm glad that I had a chance to read it. I want to thank Berkeley Publishing and also Edelweiss for this arc, and the next time Anissa Gray has a book, I'll definitely be one to read it. That is it. I had to look through my notes. I can't believe it. I got through it. This video is going to be disjointed. I think I've already used this word once. I made it in 3 parts, and I'm going to try my hand at editing all 3 parts together. And if so, I'll get the video up tonight. Thank you. Bye.